The first grappling hooks clanked against the side, digging into the wood where they bit. Marines began pulling them off from the edge surface. This was only making them drop back down to the goblins that had thrown them, however, and more were arriving by the moment. They were trying to think of a better plan when there was a huge jolt. The barge had hit one of the raft raiders dead on, knocking the inhabitants clean out as they sank to a watery end, and still the barge pushed forwards. A squad of goblins had made it to the deck, having ridden alongside the barge unseen. A man attempted to fight them with his walking cane and a boot dagger, while his dog barked and jumped into the fray. The dog had quickly mauled one of the goblins as the man and the goblin stabbed each other in unison. Neither were skilled enough to avoid the other's attack. As the goblin fell overboard, so did the man with him, unable to move from the pain of his stomach wound that had already bled heavily across the deck. There was a huge splash as together they hit the water. Several thumps confirmed that they had been sucked in under the flow of the vessel's movement. The dog, a Doberman of good size, barked and growled as more goblins took to the deck and surrounded it with hungry, murderous intent in their intelligent, keen little red eyes. Dieter was first to act, seeing that the Marines already had their hands full elsewhere. He ran in as best as he could and swung his stave, growling as ferociously, if not more than, the dog had been. Together they pounced, and a goblin was sent to the deck only to be mauled as the animal tore it apart in its prone form. Dieter swung the stave repeatedly to keep the goblins back, and backed up so as to not be overwhelmed from a joint attack if it came. "Here, boy!" he called to the dog, who seemed to understand the threat and moved back with him. More Marines appeared at last and took the fight to the goblins, pushing their lifeless bodies overboard. All eyes turned to the very front of the ship. Lots of hooks were attached. Goblins were climbing the ropes that would lead them to the deck. Maestro spoke the words of a drop spell. At that moment the goblin he had targeted felt compelled to let go of the rope he was holding, falling down it instead and taking another with him as he fell. Tordrad charged forwards and beheaded the first unopposed goblin he came to. He kicked the body overboard and turned to meet the next head-on. Blood gushed outwards in a foul-smelling spray as his scimitar cleaved another in two at the chest. Tobias hurled pebble after pebble, hitting a few goblins, dazing them long enough for a marine to run them through with a sword. Maestro spelled another goblin that attempted to climb. It, too, dropped the rope it was holding and fell to the raft on the other side of the rope, capsizing it from the impact. More goblins were in the water. Arguments broke out between them on the water's surface, with several strangling each other as they floated next to their rafts. Rysandria saw the Marines about to be overrun and reached into her robes, where against the inside layer she wore a leather holster. From it she pulled a gun. It was of beautiful craftsmanship, spectacularly fashioned, ornamentally pleasing to see. She took aim, squinting one eye. Her finger squeezed the trigger. At that moment, Maestro felt a sudden energy surge in his surroundings. Something powerful. His eyes were drawn to the gun Rysandria had fired. It shot with a satisfying, meaty, cracking sound as a trail of white energy, a projectile with a tail giving the effect of a tracer round, flew from the barrel straight into the goblin's face. His entire head exploded. Rysandria took aim again as several goblins panicked, worrying that they would be next. Dieter stared at the spectacle in as much shock as the goblins, who were scattering around the deck getting behind each other. There was suddenly a hulking slam as large green feet landed on the starboard deck. The group's eyes took in the terrible sight of an orc. It had used the distraction caused by the goblins to climb aboard unseen. Great green hands appeared against the port side railing as another orc was nearly upon the deck. Maestro readied his staff in case it came to having to defend himself. Tobias's pebble shot bounced off of the left side orc's head, with him being none the wiser. Rysandria's gun, however, was more decisive. Another great cracking boom sound erupted from the barrel as the wholly imbued bullet slammed into the orc's chest, making a smouldering hole right through him to the other side. Tobias ran and shoulder-barged into the great beast. Somehow this was enough to push backwards its already unsteady frame, as it fell overboard into the river below. Blood quickly pulled up to the surface, like an underwater volcano erupting. Tordrad had heard Maestro's frightened reaction and came over to face the orc brute. It struck out wildly at him. The huge Kislevite, larger than the orc, parried the blow and brought his foot to bear against the orc's belly. It doubled over in pain and shouted in frustration. With it exposed, Tordrad accepted the invitation and sliced its head clean off of his shoulders. So powerfully had he struck the creature that the orc's head had rolled down the deck towards the bow and halted in a position that faced the goblins. They took the dead orc's fearful expression seriously and began jumping overboard. It was up to the Marines to mop them up now. Even if Tordrad had have been able to speak Reichspiel, he still wouldn't have listened to Dieter's shouted suggestion of, "Perhaps we should keep this one alive to question him." A short while later, when they were certain that no more attackers would be coming, the group were talking amongst themselves. Tobias had been staring at Rysandria strangely. She caught sight of this and said, "Oh, not you too. What is wrong with me then?" Tobias looked suddenly surprised. He blushed a little and spoke.
I was not aware that my expression of concern gave me away. Well, perhaps I should explain. I am somewhat confused by your actions in the fight we had just been in."
Rysandria took him seriously and awaited what he would say with interest. It was as if she didn't know. Tobias was taken aback by this too, and he started.
"You are an initiate of the Order of Shalia. This I understand. But don't the scriptures say that a devotee of Shalia must wield only a quarterstaff and then only to defend herself? Therefore I do not understand why you pulled out a gun and shot it. Not that I am being unthankful. No, simply you have piqued my academic curiosity, young lady."
Maestro chipped in.
"A magical gun at that! Those were no normal bullets, I must say. A fine piece, though."
Tobias looked at Maestro as if he too was balmy. That fact was perhaps the more sound idea, but still, he was more intrigued with what the holy woman would have to say. Rysandria drew the weapon once more and inspected it, turning it this way and that to admire the engineering of it as she spoke. "Well, I am a little different to what you might be used to." Even Dieter was interested by this point and was listening in, pretending that he wasn't. Rysandria continued. "Do remember, I am of the Vor subsect of the Shalian faith. We are taught that to carry arms is no sin against Shalia. To use them wrongly, though, that would be." Maestro seemed genuinely confused and asked,
"So, picking your nose with the barrel end would be against Shalia?"
Rysandria stared at him and didn't even answer. She continued, "Murder is indeed a heinous act. To steal away all a person ever was, all they are and all they ever will be." Dieter rolled his eyes at what he considered to be the rantings of a lunatic at that moment in time. Rysandria continued, "But against evil souls, orcs and goblins who are by nature evil, living a plague upon the land, against chaos demons or those demonically imbued, those who are tainted beyond repair, those are souls without salvation. Those are souls beyond rescue. Shalia teaches that we should be merciful to our enemies. Ending lives such as these is itself a mercy unto them."